Somehow we need to spread the word as a group and run our short-term vacation rentals like a business. Make sure that neighbors want to have us.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
All right, well, hello and welcome to the RPOA Short-Term and Vacation Rentals panel discussion. We have a great group of experts with us today, experts and investors who will help us understand the best practices for owning and operating short-term vacation rentals, the biggest challenges facing the industry, and why managing short-term rentals is very different from managing traditional rental properties. So I'd like to start by introducing our expert panel. Ed Bodman, at the far end here, has over 7 years of experience owning and operating short-term rentals. He got started in the business when he bought his future retirement home, and his realtor suggested he rent it out as a vacation rental in order to offset his property taxes. So 8 properties and 7 years later, Ed has become an expert in hospitality, hosting, maintenance, marketing, cleaning, staging, furnishing, buying right, and working with city government to promote his community. Kim Post has a house and 10 cabins in Cadillac, Michigan that will all be, in the process of being converted to short-term vacation rentals, and they'll be ready by this fall. Currently, the house and 6 of her cabins are online. Kim has been a real estate investor for over 30 years, and she is the owner of Post & Associates Appraisals and Nextdoor Properties, LLC. And you can actually hear Kim on episode number 28 of the podcast. Gary Hall, he is in his 4th season running an 11 unit as an Airbnb motel. Now, Gary is an entrepreneur, passive income strategist, and the operations manager of West Shore Property Management in Muskegon, managing both short and long-term rentals. Gary was also a guest on the podcast, episode number 89, as well as the Halloween episode. So, Ed, we're gonna start with you. You bought your first vacation rental with the intention of it being your future retirement home. You weren't even thinking of it as a vacation rental at the time. But your realtor persuaded you that it would be a good idea to turn it into a vacation rental. What did your realtor say that convinced you?
Well, the first thing he said was that your house has a pool, and there isn't another one down here. We live near Lake Michigan. But the background was that I had stayed in short-term rentals in the past in Colorado and Florida and knew the concept. At the time, we still had another house that we were living in Grand Rapids, so we had a place to stay at that time as well. And so in about 2 weeks, we furnished the place, put it up, and in the first year, we generated about $17,000 in revenue. And from that point on, it was like, I want to do this.
What are the reasons? What are the compelling reasons for even making that conversion?
I'm a marketer by trade, so there were a lot of things that clicked to make that work. Certainly, when you're looking at properties, the idea is what kind of an experience can I provide that isn't in this location I'm looking at? So there's several questions that I guess you should ask yourself. Certainly, unlike month-to-month rentals, it's a little bit more engaging and involved than month-to-month rentals. So there's a lot of things that kind of come to play. Primarily, are you interested in pursuing this kind of a hospitality type of an equation versus something that's a lot more passive? And not to say that this can't be passive. You can hire a property management company, and I did speak to some of them when we first started talking about it. However, over a period of time, I realized that it was extremely interesting, and obviously the revenue opportunity was great in my community.
Kim, when you were on this panel 2 years ago, you were in the process of converting your cabins into short-term rentals, and I'm sure it's been a long journey. But I'm wondering if you could kind of distill that down into like 4 minutes. What was that like, that process of converting?
It's been very interesting, very challenging, but very rewarding. We had a property that was very distressed, and it had not been used for short-term rentals for many years. They had just, it was filled with, well, let's just say it's a stigmatized property. And we were trying to figure out what to do. So short-term rental was the thing to do, but then to get it fixed up was a project, because the whole, and actually Gary manages all of our reservations, and he came out initially after we got started, and we were just going to do one cabin at a time, and he said, no, you got to get your site cleaned up. And the site cleanup took us about 9 months. It was that bad. We had loads and loads of trash and tires and siding that had come off, or it was, if you can even imagine, it just was quite the mess. But as we're doing this, you can see light at the end of the tunnel, because all of a sudden this property is magically coming to life, and it's not this little dump anymore, and people are noticing. And I'm at Home Depot so much, I know them better in Cadillac than up here, and I keep telling them what they're asking me, and then I go to another store. So that's been very fun. Then we took us a long time to open that first cabin, because we're so review based. It was in the property, just given the history of it, that it took a long time, and it still does every time I get ready to open a cabin, because I don't want one detail missed. When somebody walks in, I want them to say it's sparkling clean. These people have not missed a beat as far as details, and we are not at all like Ed in the fact that he has high end. We are rustic cabins, but we try to make it. And the more I'm into this, Ed is rubbing off more of an experience. And the intention was going to be, I was going to be more hands off. I'm much more hands-on than what I thought, just because it's very rewarding. You get done, and the only time we see guests really is when we're up there working, but then they'll come and chat, or they'll want to see what project we're working on, and they love it, and they want to come back, and it just feeds for the next cabin to get done. So we just opened cabin 5, or the 5th cabin, and that's exciting, and people are anxious to make reservations, and we have a house that will be open. I actually work best under pressure, so I committed to a group coming June 8th, so I have to have 6 cabins and a house done, and they will be ready on June 8th for the group to be there. And then we have just 4 more cabins and an outdoor kitchen that we'll have done by fall.
So Kim, what's the income difference between what you were getting for them as just regular rentals and what you're getting for them as vacation rentals?
Regular rentals, all I have to do is rent a cabin for a little more than 5 nights a month to get the same revenue as what I was getting on a monthly basis. And these were low income housing. They really aren't the housing, but that's what they were. They're very short of low income housing in Cadillac, and it was people who were on Social Security or something like that. So I think the rents were about $450 a month. So I just have to rent them.
And so far, how much are they being rented each month?
Well, our occupancy last year was 13%, and I had a goal of if we could just, because we were so new and we were getting the word out, and I have not really done the marketing that I need to. I just have started. My goal was if I could even get 7 or 8%, that would be a win, because at least we'd get some. So we were at 13 already this year. A year ago in January, I think we sold 1 room. This year we had in January, I think 14 rooms. So we are really increasing, and we also are very fortunate because Cadillac is very big on tourists, and that has helped us. But now I really have to get marketing and follow up with the people who have been there and get them to come back and keep feeding it. But I really see huge potential just from the response that we've had.
Great.
So our income will be,
So it's ramping up.
yeah.
Gary, welcome.
You.
It's Gary Hall, everybody. So tell us about your 11-unit Airbnb motel. This is a little different concept than your traditional single-family Airbnb or vacation rental. You actually have a motel. Is it a motel or a hotel that you turned into?
Motel.
Okay, tell us about that, because when you were on the panel 2 years ago, you had just acquired that. You were in the same sort of conversion process that Kim was in. How has that been going?
It's been amazing. I started out actually at this conference hearing about Airbnb is a great way to reduce maintenance costs and maintenance hassle. Because as Kim mentioned, you can make more money with Airbnb, but if you can also spend less, because once it's set up and running, you typically tend to have a higher quality tenant, and so there's not a lot of damages. So my brother was looking for a place to house hack, and he was asking me to find him a duplex or a triplex, and I found an 11-unit motel, with a manager suite, and I asked him if he wanted to do this with me. So we set that up, and it's been amazing. Depends on the room, because each room has a little bit different vibe, but we're anywhere from 25 to 50% occupancy throughout the year right now in our motel.
What have been some of the challenges along the way? Did you have any friction with the community or the government or the city?
Being a motel has been really nice because it's already zoned commercial and it's already zoned for short term, so we haven't had any challenges with that. Biggest change is from a larger, nicer property. You're able to plan your staff a lot. Your cleaning crews a lot easier. I've got a property that I'm managing right now. In fact, one of our members here has a property where it's already booked all summer. So you can already plan, you already have everything scheduled. It's very easy to take care of. With the motel, I'll get bookings at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we luckily have it set up so that it's automated. We had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out our processes to make it automated because of this. We had to put in certain types of locks that can communicate and get some software tools that would automatically communicate with the tenants, because I'm not always going to hear that phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning, but we'll get a lot of messages really early in the morning. We'll get last minute stays, last minute cancellations. There's a lot more flux with the motel.
What is the software you're using to automate that process?
I've looked at all the softwares out there and nothing is good yet. So take that with a grain of salt. It's a very new industry, and they're trying to communicate with multiple platforms. These softwares put you on Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway. So they're trying to communicate with a lot of third-party softwares and do as much of your in-house work and automation as possible. So there isn't a good software solution out there yet. We're currently using a company called Kigo. Once again, I can't personally recommend them versus anyone else because they have as many problems as all the others do, but they are owned by a larger property management software, so my hope is that they'll grow into it.
Now, Ed, you've acquired altogether 8 higher-end vacation rental properties?
Yeah, I have 1 through 5 bedroom locations. They fit a variety of visitors. Certainly the higher bedroom counts usually are booked a little bit earlier in the season, and the lower bedroom counts are more last minute in nature.
And as you acquire the properties, what do you look for to say, okay, well, this would make a great vacation rental, and then what do you add to it to make it even higher end so that you can attract higher paying customers?
You prompted me to put together kind of a list of things that I call intangibles when I'm looking for a property. What's the draw to the area for the property certainly is number one. And I'm from Muskegon, so the beach is that. But certainly the community and what's walkable as well is part of the equation when I look at houses. What will I do to draw people to the property? I'm usually concepting some kind of a theme with each place that I look at. Not to say you can't build something, you can. It's just minimizing the effort to get to that point. A couple other things that I guess I would call intangibles as well is what I call know thy neighbors. I think the neighbors are a really important part. Even at the stage where I'm looking for a property, I try to get to know the neighbors. I'm looking at their houses to see if they're in good shape, because that kind of shapes the neighborhood to my visitors. It allows me to kind of get a sense of who they are, and really the goal is long-term is for those neighbors to be my eyes and ears when I'm not at the property. They don't know it at the time, but certainly they're really probably better than anything else in terms of understanding what people are doing when they're at my property. I look at the number of bathrooms, because I think bathrooms are a guideline for how many occupants I can put in the house. I look for a first floor bedroom if that's at all possible, because that is a broader need. And then I guess as a backup, I try to get an idea of what that property will draw as a monthly rental if I decide to move that property offline. This is a pretty engaging job for me in terms of the summertime when all the rentals are full and there's a lot of turnover, and long term I'll maybe have to hire somebody like Gary or Gary's firm that has more people that can manage things as they come up. Responsiveness is a big part, I think, of the experience, and you do have to be on call when your visitors are there. Also, I look at what else might these guests, where else might these guests stay, what the competition looks like in the immediate area, where will I get the clean and fix-it people on Saturday night when something needs to be addressed with renters, and then, from a profit perspective, I certainly. I'm looking to have positive cash flow immediately, but the long-term goal is in 2 to 3 years, I want to generate 20 to 25% of what the property is going to sell for, and that's just my benchmark. So,
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com.
Tim, now I know you have some concerns about the industry as a whole, having to do with the professionalism of the industry or lack of professionalism. And I'm wondering what in particular you're noticing about a lack of professionalism and what you might say about that.
It's interesting because we too are on a commercial piece of property, but the first thing, unlike sometimes when I asked forgiveness rather than permission, I wanted to right up front, because we were going to put a big investment in this property. I went to the township and said, this is my plan, are you supportive of it, and what's your feeling towards short-term rental properties? And I know there have been a lot in Cadillac for many years, but it's coming to light since Airbnb. So got involved, went to zoning, and after talking to the zoning officials and then just some of the people that I've been running across as we're working on this property, the biggest thing I see is that sometimes we're not doing ourselves any favors, especially the people that have just one property. They're trying to do it so that they can pay for a vacation rental, and they're not really managing it well. They're not paying attention to who they're placing, or they're placing on Super Bowl weekend and the party has, or the house that sleeps 4 has 25 people in it, or those kind of things. And I think that somehow we need to spread the word as a group and run our short-term vacation rentals like a business. We have to make sure that when you're on Airbnb, you're following those rules, you're adding into the description, and then whether you have a manager or you have neighbors or all of those things, you're up there checking on it. Make sure that that neighbors want to have us, because it would make sense to me that you would want a short-term vacation rental as your neighbor versus long-term, because we could put anybody in for long-term and they could have problems for a whole year and have complaints. But because this is such a hot topic and people are, for what I'm not quite sure some of the reasonings for not wanting it, but we don't want to add fuel to the fire. So the more that we can do to promote having a really nice property, kept up very well, because we do. If you want people to come to your property, you're going to keep that yard up. You're going to make sure either you're up there or you have somebody tending to it. You're going to go in and make sure it's well kept. The shutters aren't flapping in the wind. And so there are advantages. The other thing is we need to make sure, talk to your neighbors and let, just, hey, we just did this and we want to make, is there anything else we can do? Or what do you see that might be a problem? Or is there something you'd like us to do differently? How are the quiet hours? Just talk as much as you can. And I think all of us are kind of on that same page. The more that we can be professional about this, the more support we're going to get in general. Because I had said at they were complaining about Airbnbs at one of the meetings, and I said, well, how many calls have you had of complaints? Well, in a year they had I think 2 or 3 police calls out to a couple properties. So in the big scheme of things, that's very little, but as always, it's the negative that stays out. And also no one ever calls and says, hey, I have an Airbnb next door and I love it. We want you to pass whatever bills. That just doesn't happen. So the negative is always apparent. So we as a group need to be professional and then promote our professionalism.
As vacation rental owners, you have a responsibility to other vacation rental owners to advocate for the industry and engage in best practices.
Yes.
Gary, so you not only own and operate your own short-term vacation rentals, but you also manage for other people as well. As a short-term rental manager, how do you set your clients' expectations? And what are some of your best practices that might set you apart from the competition?
So as Kim mentioned, these are small businesses. And just like when you get into a long-term rental, you're starting a small business. When you're moving into short-term rental, the business isn't so much renting. The business is a luxury hotel, just a really, really tiny one with maybe 1 room. And so you need to treat it like that. There's different things that you have to put into place. A lot of people will want to try and just take their normal rental and turn it into a short-term rental. That typically doesn't work as well. You need slightly higher end finishes. You don't have to spend a lot. I know you can find some really nice furniture at your local thrift store or on Facebook, but you need it to look nice. And then you need to be prepared to spend what it takes to give people a good experience. A good example, almost every owner that I take over, they'll have 1 set of sheets, because they'll stage the property and it'll look really nice. But you need a minimum of 3 sets of sheets, and that's a minimum for every single bed you have. Because you need one that's on, you need one at the property in case there's an issue. I mean, people have had issues and they need to change the sheets there. You need to have one in the wash, and probably an emergency. I mean, personally at our hotel, we have a lot more than just 3 sets. We don't use them all. We have brand new ones that are just sitting there waiting. But if in a short-term rental, something goes wrong and it takes a day to fix, you've messed up 1 out of 365 days and it's not that big of an issue. If you mess up 1 day of someone's vacation, I mean, now you've destroyed 1/6 of their vacation, 1/3 of their vacation, and it's their vacation that they spent all year saving up for. I mean, it creates a very negative opinion. So as well as that, when we're doing management, we're not going to be able to call our handymen that are at a cheap rate because we use them all the time. If someone calls and there's a plumbing leak or something, we're calling the guy in the phone book that's got the 24-hour van who's going to show up in the next hour. You're going to spend that extra $1 to make sure that your guests, because they're no longer tenants, that your guests are having a good experience. And then the next thing is going through your property. And while they are guests, everyone knows, the customer's always right. But along with those memes that are out there, they always make fun of the customer and the dumb questions that are asked. I have been asked how to get out of my room. I've gotten a phone call because they could not figure out how to unlock the door. You get calls, how do I work the television? You get calls on anything that's in your property that's even slightly different than what they're used to, they're going to get questions on. So you have to create a guest book that goes through. Kim's got some great ones where she's taken videos and pictures of explaining how the property works. And the littlest thing will trip people up. I know, for example, on Kim's, she's got older rustic cabins. So with her lock, she's got to push in a pin and then turn the doorknob and then squeeze a door. So that's one of the questions that we bring up and that we talk to people about. I've got other properties where the directions don't quite make sense because the road ends and then you got to go up a trail. So you have to, when you're giving the instructions on how to get there, you've got to, I don't want to say idiot proof, but you got to expect these people are traveling, not used to the area, don't want to think, they're on vacation, and you have to look at your property in that light. The other thing is, once again, it's a mini hotel. We tell people to expect lower occupancy the first year. You will get repeat visitors. I mean, even in my motel, I get repeat visitors. I've got one guy, we've been open, I think 4 seasons, and he's on his 8th or 9th visit. He's got there's a Blue Lake Arts Camp, I believe, that's in that area, and he goes up there constantly, and every time he's in this area, he stays at our place. But that's not something you're going to get the first year. You wow them, you make sure they have a good experience, and your occupancy rates increase. We started at about a 20% occupancy, and our older units that are more established on these online platforms, as I said, are at 50% occupancy now. So this is also not something that you can just jump into and jump out of, say, I'm going to get into short-term rentals and, not do anything to my long-term rental, just move someone in and triple my money and then, not have to think about it. This is a much more involved process. You're trading the maintenance issues and the entitlement issues of some tenants for a lot more hands-on and a lot more nitpicky issues, but typically from a calmer place where people are more respectful and glad to be hosted by you.
I'd like to open it up to audience questions. Do we have any questions from the audience right now?
What platform do you use for scheduling?
I use just the platforms that, the 2 main platforms, HomeAway, Vrbo, and Airbnb platforms for scheduling. They have technology to merge your URLs and cross-reference them so that if you book on one, the other one automatically blocks off.
And then as I mentioned, I use the software Kigo, and that does the exact same thing and allows us to set the prices in one location and have it populate to all 3.
We are present on TripAdvisor and some of those, but we don't take reservations. They don't share.
Ed, did you talk about switching between Airbnb and rentals? And if you do that, I'm wondering how you manage having them furnished versus unfurnished.
Sure. Everything that I rent is furnished. In this part of the country, the main season is from Memorial Day to Labor Day, maybe a little bit into September and early October. Initially, I started looking for renters to rent my property from October until May. I didn't have much success with that. I was actually approached by several people who wanted to do that, but they didn't want to pay much for that time frame. So in October, sometimes I will look for a long-term rental. I'll make the lease end May 1, and on May 1, if I like them and they like me, we continue on, and I might leave it as a long-term rental. If not, I move it back into the short-term and just spruce it up. One of the things I've found in the last couple of years is that you could put a property online in May and probably rent at 75% of the occupancy you otherwise would. So reservations are getting shorter, I think, as there's more availability. And so that's what I do. I really I look for long-term renters on some of my properties. Some of them they generate enough revenue during the summertime where I don't make that move. I approach HR groups, realtors, groups that help with travel support for folks that are in short-term or temporary jobs for 2 or 3 months that would otherwise be staying in a hotel or motel. So that's what I tried to do, and hope that answers your question.
Raton?
Good morning, everybody. I own a couple of properties up in Muskegon that 2 of them are been Airbnbs. And to Kim's point about who we allow to be our guest, one of the things that I did is get the local calendar of events, and the county publishes one, and then also surrounding counties. And our first year, during the I forget what the festival is called in Rothbury, Electric Festival or whatever. Unfortunately, we weren't aware of how the situation works, and people go camping for that week up at that festival. But before the festival starts and after the festival starts, a lot of people are looking for space to crash at, and we have a limit of 6 or 7 people in our residence. And first weekend that we rented to somebody, we didn't quite know what they were doing, and there must have been a dozen people that crashed on the living room and this and that, and sleeping bags, and no damage occurred, but it was an abuse of our rules and things. So the weekend after, we had a lot of reservations that people wanted to rent, and we just said no, and we denied them. And then the following year, what I did is I specifically looked on the calendar to see when that festival was, and then the weekend before and the weekend after, I jacked up the price of $600 a night just to make sure that I didn't get that. And it was okay that it was vacant because the property performed extremely well. And then to Ed's point about other groups, one of the Airbnbs is a small 2-bedroom house that normally rents for like $650 a month as a normal rental. And it's near the hospital, Mercy Hospital campus in Muskegon. We ended up getting a nursing agency, and I'm embarrassed to tell you how much rent we got for it. There was 90 days originally, then they wanted to renew for another 90 days, but it worked out extremely well. 0 maintenance issues. I think a dishwasher got plugged up one time, and but that was probably the most lucrative rental income I've ever had from that particular property over 10 years. But be careful of the local events going on, and if you think there's going to be large gatherings or large parties, you want to avoid that, because that's going to give you a negative impact in your neighborhood and things like that. And then also look for the properties that are near hospitals, and for the short-term nurses and visiting doctors and things like that, because that's extremely lucrative.
Yeah, I would question if you're going to go down this road. It sounds to me like it's kind of hands-on. It sounds like you got to pay attention to what's going on in the community and know a lot of stuff. And for me as a landlord, I like to be really prepared. I like to have spare furnaces, spare water heaters, spare toilets, a lot of stuff. If something happens, I take care of it. In this situation, say somebody moves in and they just call you up and say, you know what? The couch smells like piss. The chair smells like piss. Cats. I mean, do you just keep spare furniture and stuff? You can just
this is the pleasant part that I absolutely love, because we also have long-term rentals, and I can walk in one day, and Gary will review if we have somebody that just leaves it perfect, because I have a guidebook how you check out and all that. I'll call Gary and say, give them a 5-star review. If they're not great, we don't review them, unless I think we've only done one bad review. I mean, we just are. But the worst one we ever had, I opened the door and my first instinct was, oh my gosh, what a mess this is. And then I got into it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Kim, this is nuts. You are overreacting. They had just not picked up their towels, and they had left some of their own stuff. But it's nothing like a trash out, or when somebody moves out in one of my other units. It's still, nothing was damaged. They had left some food in the refrigerator that kind of dripped, but everything within 30 minutes was cleaned up, and not anything was bad. So the worst case, now I know there are people who have had some major damages and that cost money, but in general, we have far exceeded the expectations of how well people take care of our cabins. And our cabins are fairly inexpensive. They're $70 a night, and they are rustic. We have a lot of hard surfaces, so that the floors are all hard surfaces. I try to look out because I know people are going to be snowmobiling or doing outdoor stuff. So if they track in, I want to just be able to clean it fast. But we've had to not replace a thing, and sheets or anything. It's amazing.
I can echo that. Certainly on the first year that I rented, I had the best dog ever chew on windowsills in my house. And from that point on, I haven't allowed pets.
Yeah.
In our motel, we've had over 800 stays, and we've had one visit where we had to block off the next day because it took extra cleaning than normal, just once. With all of our rentals, we've only actually had one claim for damages with Airbnb, and unfortunately, it was the owner's first time renting the property. So it does happen, but it's very rare.
Yeah, I had a question. I think this is mostly for Kim. In your process of changing a long-term rental over to a short-term rental, how much investment did it take to go from a low-income long-term rental to these cabins that you can do on Airbnb?
A lot. A lot.
Quantify that. What does that translate to?
I think this is just kind of broad because each cabin was different. Even though they're all the same, some were in very bad shape. The house was a disaster and I'm so far over budget. But for the house and 10 cabins, over $150,000 just in improvements. And that's not taken into consider the site I think there are things we are going to add as we cash flow, just to make it, we're not a destination at this point, but there are things we can add to our site. First thing I'm going to do is an outdoor kitchen because I have another group that's going to come up, and I promised that we would have an outdoor kitchen for them. So by September, we will have an outdoor kitchen. So that kind of thing. But it's an investment that's going to last much longer than in our long terms, because we also have similar properties that we do affordable housing in, and we have fixed those all up. Now the price to fix those up are not as much as because we're not doing all the details and refinishing wood and that kind of stuff. But even when they leave, I still have to I have to repaint and do those kind of things after a year. And we are in those, not necessarily me, but my cleaning people are in after every guest. They take videos. So we know if there's one little thing amiss, we are in there fixing it. So we don't have any long-term, just like we were getting ready to open this one, and the water heater is not that old, but we were all set to open it, and I'm like, you know what, forget it. We need a new water heater. I don't want to call at midnight because the element needs to be done, and we're right at the tipping point. We can't risk having a bad review. Stop everything. Let's replace that. So that's kind of where, in my rental, I would have just left it, and then when it started sputtering or something, we would go in and take care of it because, like Gary said, we have to be on top of it with short term, where we can let things slide a day if we needed to in long term. I will say it's very difficult for me because I'm a landlord. I hold people accountable for my tenants. So I am not good with guests because I have to let the customer service be. I can't take off my landlord hat very easily. And it's like, what? You have 6 people in this two-room place? You cannot be, no, Gary, there's 6 people in this cabin, and there's only supposed to be 2. You deal with it, and I'll just smile and carry on.
We have a question over here.
Well, I think I just wanted to speak more on your thing. One thing with vacation rentals is you have to remember we get rated as the owners, but we also rate guests. Yep. And so, to your comment about knowing, because my husband and I stay at Airbnb all the time when we travel. And so knowing that we are going to get rated as well, and in the future might be denied occupancy at a place because somebody left us a bad review changes the dynamic a little bit back and forth. And in reality, as far as pets go, if you're gone for a week, you're not bringing your cat. So maybe you're going to try to sneak your dog in. And if you know your neighbors, a dog is not easy to hide. They bark at some point, and so if there is a no pet policy and you know your neighbors well, they're going to tell on the guest, and that stuff's going to be found out a whole lot easier and differently than in your typical long-term rentals. So I think just to speak a little bit more on some of his questions.
Well, very good point. And the other good thing is we have access to, if they do damages, it can go on their visa if we have specified it in our description. So it's not like the tenant where you're going to have to chase after that extra money.
I had a question about corporate rentals. Is there something like Airbnb for corporate rentals? Who do you contact to advertise your corporate rentals? And if your property is primarily a summer destination, when would you start advertising, like the end of August or whatnot, for your winter corporate rentals?
Ours are year-round.
Airbnb does do corporate rentals. You can do rentals for 30 days or more on Airbnb and VRBO. And then I know personally with us, we've dealt with other real estate companies, the larger ones like Coldwell Banker, Remax, the ones that are nationwide. They typically have a department that specializes that and finds those leases. So if you call them and call the big name agencies, you should be able to find out who's in charge of placing for executive rentals.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of work involved in that. I don't know that there's one location where you can either promote or gather that information. I run an ongoing ad on Craigslist. I got a call yesterday from somebody from North Carolina that was looking for someone for a long-term stay. So I think you have to put a little bit of work into it, get to know your community a little bit, maybe become involved in the chamber, get to know the large organizations in your community, maybe the HR people, and then the hospitals as well, and any other types of organizations that have transient or temporary folks coming in for a period of time that are obviously technical people or more on the white collar line.
I have several duplexes, and I was thinking about taking half of one of those and just start this Airbnb furnished rental. Any comments about renting duplexes, half to a long-term tenant, half to the changeover from Airbnb, et cetera? Thanks.
If your tenant, existing tenant is really good and neat and tidy and isn't going to be a problem, but there's a definite, when an Airbnb guest or a short-term guest drives up, in most cases, I think they want the whole experience. And if your long-term tenant sitting on his porch smoking or has a bunch of junk out, or that's going to deter from that. Or if the yard isn't picked up or the trash isn't picked up, I think that's going to be a problem. We still have 2 long-term tenants, and we have purposefully not remodeled anything right around there, and I put it in my notes that we're in the process. You're going to see construction workers, and we're very upfront in our descriptions just so that people know what to expect. But our tenants don't ever come out. They're old people and they just stay in their place, so it hasn't been a problem, but I'd be careful of that.
As Ed mentioned, the neighborhood is actually part of your experience and you get judged by that. I've been dinged because we don't have quality restaurants nearby. That's part of the experience. So that's up to you. You have to make that decision on whether that neighbor is going to be a good part of your experience.
I will say we have a motel very similar to Gary's, only ours is we have turned it into Efficiencies and Studios. And the very smallest one that's very hard for me to rent long-term, we do have it on Airbnb, and we short-term it for seasonal, like construction workers. It's not, I wouldn't call it a corporate professional rental, but it's fairly busy. And I think the rent is $200 a week plus cleaning fees. And that one I don't have to rent it all that much, and it does pretty well.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there because we have an important announcement to make, and we're running out of time. But Kim, you had talked about the professionalism of this industry, and you have something to say about that in a special announcement. So
We do, actually. Gary and I, if some of you are aware, we do a short-term vacation rental meetup the first Wednesday of every month at noon at the RPOA office. And we now are live on Facebook with that. And we are live on webinars for our members, and the group it keeps growing. And so the board has approved that we now have forming, or just starting. You guys are the first to hear it. The big announcement's going to be at 1:00 today, but there is now a short-term rental association of the RPOA, and you can all be charter members. $49.99 membership, and if you sign up at the conference, that will be always, your membership will only be $49.99 a year. Yes, per year. And there are many reasons for doing this, and I'm going to let you talk about the lobbying, but we will have our own website. This is the infant stages, so we are going to create this organization as our group wants it. So we'll go wherever we decide that there is a need. But to get started, we will have our own website for members only. And you can continue to come to the to the short term without being a member, but then you won't have access to some of the recordings and things. We're going to try to add forms and just things that make sure you do. We're in the process right now this year at our short term of going through from kind of start to finish how to get going into the short term vacation rentals. Things like, know your location. What do you have to be aware of when you're picking the property, all the way to systems, to marketing, writing your descriptions. So we would welcome you to be guests. You want to talk about the government affairs, which is a really big part of it.
A really big reason why we wanted to create an association is we're a pretty loose gathering of people on Airbnb. There's not a big group where the hotels and other lobbyists are able to really push for legislation that kind of pushes back on the short-term rentals. So there's been a lot of laws and a lot of things coming into place that hurt our property rights. Because of that, we wanted to form an association where we can show we've got a large number of members that vote in Michigan, and we're going to focus Tabitha, I think Clay and Tabitha are speaking today tomorrow
Yep.
about some of their efforts lobbying in Lansing. We're going to push for some short-term rental legislation that's going to protect our property rights, and we're also looking into preparing an amicus brief for a court case that's going before the Michigan Supreme Court. A lady who has been denied the use of her house as a short-term rental is suing the city, saying that their zoning laws are not constitutional, and they're going up to the Supreme Court. And so we're trying to fight for that for you guys. We need to be able to show a large membership, so we are asking that you guys join, become charter members, and help us decide where we want to take this organization.
We have applications. You can take them and then turn them in at the front desk. And you'll be in on the ground floor. It's really exciting because this is, I think Keith had said, this is only the second time in the history of RPOA that we have done something like this. It's we have always done, our major committees and those kind of things. And so this is really a branch off into something new, and it's very exciting. I think that together we can do lots of great things.
And Gary and Kim, real quick, how many professional organizations exist to represent short-term vacation rental owners?
At this point, we can't find any.
Last time I Googled short-term rental associations, all I found was a group that was dedicated to getting rid of them, and they had just done that in Toronto. So please join us.
Yeah. So just like owning rental property, that's a business. Short-term vacation rentals, that's a very different type of business as well. It's good to be represented by a professional organization. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.